Millionaire hires single mother to take care of his winery. But when he returned, he couldn't believe what he saw. The millionaire Daniel Crawford sat in his office, his gaze lost in the vast skyline of New York City. In recent days, the pain of losing his parents continued to haunt him like a constant shadow. The unexpected news of inheriting a vineyard in rural California felt like a distant detail amid his grief and the exhausting demands of business. He knew little about the property. He vaguely recalled brief visits there with his parents during childhood, but those memories were hazy, wrapped in feelings he couldn't quite identify. Before continuing, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Despite the temptation to leave everything in the hands of his lawyers, something made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the last direct connection to his parents, something they had deemed important enough to preserve. He felt compelled to visit the vineyard himself before making any decisions. He needed to see with his own eyes what was left of the place. Upon arriving in Napa Valley, Daniel was taken aback by the breathtaking scenery. Rolling hills blanketed in vineyards stretched as far as the eye could see, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. The crisp air, infused with the scent of ripe grapes, seemed almost like an affront to his world of concrete and steel. The main estate, perched atop a hill, was grand yet visibly worn by time. As he wandered through the property, a strange sense of déjà vu enveloped him. The gentle rustling of leaves and the whisper of the breeze carried him back to a distant memory. Running through the vineyards, the laughter of a young girl echoing beside him. It was vague but deeply emotional. Shaking his head to dispel the sensation, Daniel decided he couldn't leave the vineyard in complete neglect. Someone would need to oversee it temporarily while he determined its future. He ordered a recruitment team to find a manager. He didn't want to waste time, yet, unexpectedly, he sensed that this return to his roots might be more than just a business obligation. Perhaps the vineyard held stories he needed to hear before making his final decision. Daniel arrived at the vineyard in the late afternoon, as the sky painted the horizon in hues of orange and gold. The driver stopped the car in front of the grand mansion, its stone walls seemingly guarding the secrets of generations past. Stepping out of the vehicle, Daniel paused for a moment, absorbing the atmosphere around him. There was an almost reverent silence, broken only by the distant chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. A cool breeze carried the bittersweet aroma of ripe grapes and damp earth. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to etch that sensation into his memory. The house was partially abandoned. Despite its grandeur, the exterior walls bore fine cracks, and the garden appeared overtaken by time. He pushed open the large, solid wooden doors and stepped into an interior that, though still imposing, showed clear signs of age. Antique furniture, a central staircase leading to the upper floor, and dusty chandeliers created a scene of quiet melancholy. Daniel walked slowly, his hand trailing along the polished wood railing, noticing small details that his younger eyes would never have caught. After exploring the house, he decided to take a walk through the vineyards. The sun was already low in the sky, and the golden light filtering through the rows of grapevines cast long, tranquil shadows. He followed a dirt path that wound through the plantation. The strong, sweet aroma of ripe grapes ready for harvest filled the air. As he walked, a series of memories resurfaced in brief flashes, images from his boyhood days. Running alongside other children, his parents sitting beneath a pergola, laughing and toasting with glasses of wine. At one point, he stopped by a small clearing where an old stone fountain lay forgotten. The water barely dripped from its rusted spout. Daniel crouched down and ran his fingers over the cold stone surface, overtaken by an inexplicable sense of nostalgia. It felt like a fragment of a puzzle from his childhood, one he couldn't fully piece together. The sensation unsettled him in a subtle yet powerful way. It was as if the place itself demanded that he reconnect with the parts of himself he had long left behind. Night fell quickly, and he made his way back to the house, where his team was already organizing interviews with candidates to manage the vineyard. As he dined alone in the large dining room, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something more awaited him here. Something he didn't yet understand, but that seemed to be quietly waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The following morning, Daniel woke early. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air as he descended the main staircase, ready for the interviews. The day was bright and clear, bringing with it a lightness that contrasted with the seriousness of his mission. He needed to find someone trustworthy, someone who could not only handle the day-to-day operations but also restore a sense of life and purpose to the vineyard. The first few interviews left little impression. The candidates were experienced, but none of them seemed to truly connect with the essence of the vineyard. Daniel felt as though he were searching for something more, though he wasn't entirely sure what that was. Then Olivia Mitchell walked into the room, and he immediately sensed a difference. She had a calm presence but carried a depth in her eyes that spoke of resilience. Her brown hair was tied back in a practical manner, and her hands, lightly marked by years of vineyard work, revealed that she was no stranger to hard labor. Olivia sat before him with a firm yet humble posture. Daniel began the usual round of questions about her education, previous experience, and work methods. He learned that she was a skilled winemaker with experience at several renowned vineyards in the region. What truly caught his attention, however, was the way she spoke of cultivating grapes as if it were something sacred. For Olivia, each harvest had a story, a unique identity that needed to be honored. I see wine as the result of harmony between the soil, the climate, and patience, she said with a voice that was calm but resolute. It's a process that can't be rushed. I learned that through many mistakes and a few losses. Daniel was intrigued by that last statement. There was something about it that hinted at a difficult past. He didn't want to pry, but his curiosity grew. Olivia mentioned that she was a single mother to a 6-year-old boy, which had led her to forego certain opportunities in order to prioritize raising her son. The way she spoke about the child conveyed an unconditional love but also a weight of responsibility she bore alone. When the interview ended, Daniel found himself reflecting on the woman. She wasn't just qualified. There was a quiet inner strength about her that captivated him. For some reason, he felt an immediate sense of trust in her. After reviewing a few additional details, he decided to hire her. Olivia received the news with a modest smile, but her eyes glimmered momentarily, as if this job represented a fresh opportunity to rebuild her life. Later, as Daniel watched Olivia walk through the vineyard, he felt a rare sense of calm. For the first time in a long while, he began to believe that this place could become more than just an inherited property. Somehow, it might be a new beginning for both of them. In the first few days of her work, Daniel maintained a professional and reserved demeanor, observing Olivia's performance from a distance. She had already familiarized herself with the winery staff and the daily routines. He saw her walking between the rows of vines, inspecting the leaves, tasting grapes, and discussing cultivation techniques and necessary adjustments for the next harvest with the workers. Olivia seemed to belong there in a natural way, as if every inch of the land acknowledged her presence. Daniel was impressed. He, who had initially seen the vineyard as just another asset to be sold off, now began to perceive its intrinsic value. One afternoon, as he approached Olivia during a barrel fermentation inspection, he asked her about the changes she planned to make. Olivia surprised him with her vision. It wasn't solely about profit. She aimed to restore traditional family practices that honored the identity of the wines produced there. "This place has a story," she explained, running her hand over one of the large oak barrels. "You can't forget what's already been built. Every detail, from the type of grape to the aging process, carries a message that the customer can sense in the first sip. I want to bring that message back." Her words moved him. He had never thought of the vineyard as something so meaningful. To him, business had always been about numbers, goals, and expansions. But as he listened to Olivia, something in his perspective began to shift. There was a genuine passion in her, a deep connection to the land and the creative process, that he couldn't fully understand. As the days passed, Daniel found himself seeking her out more often, pretending to need updates on the progress of operations. In truth, he just wanted to be near her. Olivia, on the other hand, noticed his constant presence but didn't know how to respond. She had grown accustomed to guarding herself emotionally. The last thing she wanted was to let someone into her life who might threaten the balance she had fought so hard to restore after being abandoned by her ex-husband. During a peaceful evening, as they walked side by side near the vineyards, the silence between them didn't feel uncomfortable. On the contrary, it carried a quiet tension, as if both were aware of something unspoken. At an unexpected moment, Daniel stopped and looked directly at her. "I need to admit something," he began hesitantly. "I didn't expect this vineyard to affect me so much. But meeting you and seeing what you're doing here, it's changed how I see things." Olivia averted her gaze, unsettled. She felt the warmth in his words but also a pang of fear. She couldn't afford to dream of something more. Yet, Daniel's sincerity touched her in a way she couldn't ignore. That night marked a turning point, not just for the vineyard but for what was quietly blooming between them. It was something fragile, laden with unspoken hopes, beginning to take root like the vines surrounding them, bathed in moonlight. The next day seemed to begin like any other. Olivia was organizing tasks in the mansion's kitchen while her son played outside with one of the property's dogs. Everything was calm until the sudden ring of the landline phone broke the quiet. As she answered, her expression slowly shifted. On the other end, the cold voice of a lawyer delivered news she never expected to hear. Her ex-husband, who had been absent for years, was filing for custody of their son. She froze in shock. For a moment, the phone slipped from her hand, and painful memories overwhelmed her mind. She recalled the day the man she had once loved abandoned her. He had met a younger colleague at work and, without remorse, left Olivia with a baby only a few months old and a mountain of responsibilities. Since then, she had done everything she could to raise their son on her own, facing loneliness and the constant fear of not being enough. Now, after all this time without so much as a call or visit, he was suddenly making this outrageous claim. Hanging up the phone, she felt her legs weaken. She collapsed to the kitchen floor, covering her face with her hands as silent tears streamed down her cheeks. It was as if the wounds she thought had healed were now brutally reopened. She remained there for a while, lost in her thoughts, until a deep, concerned voice pulled her back to reality. "Olivia, are you okay?" Daniel stood at the doorway, watching her with a look of apprehension. He had never seen her so distressed. She quickly wiped her face, trying to mask her despair, but it was too late. Daniel walked closer and crouched beside her. "What happened? You can tell me," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Olivia hesitated for a few seconds, but when she met his gaze, she felt a sense of safety she hadn't experienced in a long time. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her words coming out in fragmented pieces, as though they were too heavy to say aloud. Daniel listened intently, his expression shifting between shock and indignation. When she finished, he didn't hesitate to offer his support. "You're not going through this alone, Olivia. I have excellent lawyers. We'll fight this ridiculous attempt. He has no right to just show up after all this time and demand custody." "Daniel, I can't afford lawyers like that," Olivia began to protest, but he interrupted her with a firm gesture. "Don't worry about that. I'll handle everything. You don't deserve to face this battle on your own." His words felt like a soothing balm to her soul. For the first time in what seemed like forever, someone was willing to stand by her side and fight for her. Without thinking, she threw herself into his arms, wrapping him in a tight embrace as though trying to convey all her gratitude and relief. Daniel was momentarily surprised but soon relaxed into the embrace, feeling the shared pain and comfort between them. In that moment, he realized just how much this woman had begun to mean to him. The connection that had once been subtle now pulsed with an undeniable intensity. As he held her close, Daniel caught the familiar scent of Olivia's perfume. Strangely, a childhood memory surfaced in his mind. As if that fragrance were tied to something significant he couldn't yet fully remember. When they pulled apart, Olivia's eyes were still tearful, but now there was a spark of hope within them. Without speaking further, Daniel helped her to her feet and accompanied her to the living room. There, in the comforting silence of the house, both of them recognized that their lives were becoming more deeply intertwined. A challenge lay ahead, but they would face it together. In the days that followed, Olivia sensed a shift in the atmosphere around her. Daniel's presence became constant but never intrusive. He was there whenever she needed him, offering words of encouragement and overseeing the legal preparations to block her ex-husband's custody claim. The lawyers Daniel hired were efficient from the start, reassuring Olivia with solid strategies for the case. Still, an undercurrent of fear lingered within her. What if the judge ruled in favor of the boy's father? What if she had to endure the heartbreak of watching her son be taken from her arms? That afternoon, as a gentle breeze stirred the curtains in the living room, Olivia tried to focus on her tasks. She was cataloging samples of grapes for the next harvest when Daniel entered the improvised office, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He approached slowly, the way he always did when he noticed she was deep in thought. "I thought you might need a break," Daniel said, offering her the cup. She accepted it with a timid smile, thanking him for the gesture. They sat side by side on a small sofa near the window. For a few moments, silence surrounded them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Olivia sensed that Daniel, somehow, understood the burden she carried without the need for many words. "I've been thinking," he finally broke the silence. "Have you ever stopped to give yourself credit for everything you've built here? Despite all the challenges, you've turned this vineyard into something extraordinary. Not everyone can do that." Olivia lowered her gaze, stirring the cup in her hands. It was rare for her to hear such praise, and she wasn't sure how to respond. Since her ex-husband had left, she had learned to rely solely on herself. The idea of someone recognizing her efforts and believing in her abilities was both comforting and terrifying. "I didn't have much of a choice," she said softly. "When you're on your own, you learn quickly to do what needs to be done, no matter how hard it is." Daniel nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. He, too, knew what it was like to live under the weight of high expectations and responsibilities. Yet, as he looked at Olivia, he saw someone who had risen above adversity with a strength he deeply admired. There was something about her that made him want to protect her, even though he knew she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. "You're not alone anymore, Olivia," he said quietly but firmly. "I know it's hard to trust someone after everything you've been through, but I'm here, and I'll keep being here, no matter what happens." A wave of emotion swelled in Olivia's chest. His words, so sincere, touched a part of her she thought had been locked away long ago. Her eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't try to hide them. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to be vulnerable in the presence of another person. "Thank you, Daniel," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for everything you're doing for me." He gave her a gentle smile, leaning forward just enough to hold her hand delicately. "You don't need to repay me. We're in this together." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Their eyes met and held, locked in a gaze filled with unspoken emotions. There was a subtle tension in the air, an anticipation they both recognized but weren't yet ready to explore. Then, almost as if by silent agreement, they gradually let go of each other, returning their focus to the peacefulness of the moment. Yet deep down, they both knew that something much larger was unfolding between them, a connection that wouldn't be denied for long. The evening arrived with a soft golden light, illuminating the vineyards and painting the surrounding hills in warm hues. Olivia was in the fermentation shed, checking the tanks and adjusting a few controls. As she worked, a recurring thought kept disturbing her. The embrace she had shared with Daniel days before. That moment of closeness had been filled with emotions she hadn't yet fully processed. His scent, the warmth of his hands as they held her, it all left her feeling restless, yet strangely comforted. She didn't have time for confusing emotions. Not now, not with a custody hearing for her son fast approaching. And yet, her mind kept circling back to Daniel. The way he always showed up at the right moments, offering support without encroaching on her space, was something she couldn't ignore. It was as though he understood exactly what she needed, even when she didn't. That connection scared her, but it also made her feel less alone. Suddenly, as she adjusted a valve, she heard footsteps echoing through the shed. Turning around, she saw Daniel entering, his light eyes gleaming in the glow of the setting sun. He hesitated for a moment before approaching, as if measuring the gravity of the moment. Olivia wiped her hands on a cloth and tried to maintain her composure. "I wasn't expecting you here," she said, attempting a casual tone. "I thought you might need a break," he replied with a faint smile. "And I wanted to talk to you about something." She raised her eyebrows, intrigued. Daniel rarely spoke openly about his deeper thoughts, but there was something different about his tone, an earnestness that captured her attention. He stopped beside her, his gaze shifting to the large stainless steel tanks as if searching for the right words. "When I was helping you with the lawyers, I ended up uncovering something about your perfume," he said, unexpectedly changing the subject. Olivia let out a light, almost relieved laugh. "My perfume? That's what you wanted to talk about?" Daniel shook his head, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I know it sounds strange, but that night we hugged, it triggered an old memory of when I was a kid, spending summers here. There was a girl who wore a similar scent. I couldn't figure out who it was until now." Olivia paused, surprised. It was an oddly curious coincidence. "My mother used to make artisanal perfumes," she explained. "This one I wear is special, custom-made for me since I was 6. It's possible you smelled the same scent when you were younger." Daniel's eyes widened slightly, as though a crucial piece of his memory had just fallen into place. "So it was you," Daniel murmured almost to himself. "The girl I used to play with every summer." Olivia was speechless. Slowly, long-forgotten images began to surface in her mind. A boy with golden hair, laughter in the village park, games played among the trees. She never would have imagined that the boy from her past would become the man standing before her now. "My God," she whispered. "It's true. I remember." Daniel nodded, a nostalgic gleam in his eyes. "Back then, I used to tell my mom that you were my great love," he confessed with a shy smile. "Of course, I was 9 and didn't know anything about life. But the truth is, I counted down the days until summer just to see you." For a few moments, they stood in silence, absorbing the strange and beautiful revelation. It was as if fate had orchestrated their reunion with meticulous care, weaving invisible threads between their lives. "Life takes us on unexpected paths, doesn't it?" Olivia said, still processing everything. "It does. But sometimes, it brings us back to where we were always meant to be." They gazed at each other for a long moment, as if the emotional walls between them were beginning to crumble. There was a new understanding, a bond growing stronger with each word they shared. Both felt that this discovery was not the end of their story, but the beginning of something far greater. That night, Olivia reflected on her conversation with Daniel. Every detail of their shared memories replayed in her mind like scenes from an old movie. She remembered the light-hearted laughter, the races through the park, and the afternoons when, tired from playing, they would lie on the grass and stare at the sky. It was almost impossible to believe that the boy who had left such an impression on her childhood was now part of her life again. But this time, their connection was deeper and more complex, filled with nuances that went beyond mere nostalgia. The next morning, Olivia found Daniel on the veranda of the main house, sipping his coffee and watching the sunrise over the vineyards. The peaceful quiet of the place was interrupted only by the birdsong. She hesitated for a moment before approaching, still trying to make sense of the emotions stirring within her. Daniel noticed her and smiled gently, gesturing for her to join him. "Good morning," he greeted in a calm voice. "Did you sleep well?" "Hard to say," she replied, taking a seat beside him. "I think I spent half the night reliving memories from when we were kids." Daniel chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I was thinking about that too. It's strange, isn't it? How our lives have crossed paths again after all this time." Olivia looked out at the horizon, the vines stretching in perfect rows before them. The scene seemed more beautiful than ever, perhaps because she was seeing it through a new perspective. "Do you believe in destiny, Daniel?" she asked, turning to face him. He considered the question for a moment before answering. "I've never thought much about it. I always saw my life as a series of choices, opportunities one had to take or let go. But now I'm starting to think that maybe some things are beyond our control. Like finding you again, here, in this place." The sincerity in Daniel's words made Olivia's heart race. There was a tenderness in him that she hadn't noticed at first, but that was now gradually revealing itself. She found herself drawn to this side of him, a vulnerability hidden beneath the exterior of a successful businessman. "I remember how you used to say you wanted to be an explorer when you grew up," she said with a soft laugh. "You said you'd discover mysterious lands and hidden treasures." Daniel laughed as well, leaning back in his chair. "Looks like life led me to a different kind of exploration. Now I explore contracts and investments. Not exactly thrilling stuff." Olivia looked at him with a gentle but serious expression. "I think you're discovering something far more valuable now. Not just about this place, but about yourself." Her words struck a chord deep within him. He had never really stopped to consider how disconnected he had become from his own emotions until Olivia came back into his life. She helped him see things in a new light, as if she were guiding him to remember who he had been before the weight of expectations and responsibilities consumed him. A comfortable silence settled between them once again. They sat side by side, watching the start of a new day unfold. They didn't need many words in that moment. Just being in each other's presence was enough. Both knew that, although their pasts had shaped them, it was the future, full of promises and possibilities, that now lay before them. The day of the hearing arrived, and Olivia woke with her heart racing. Anxiety consumed her with every passing second as memories of the lawyer's phone call replayed in her mind. She knew she had to stay strong, but the fear of losing her son gnawed at her relentlessly. As she descended the staircase of the mansion, she found Daniel already waiting for her in the living room, dressed in an immaculate suit. His calm expression stood in stark contrast to the storm of emotions raging within her. "Ready?" he asked, his voice steady and reassuring, as if he knew exactly what she needed to hear in that moment. Olivia took a deep breath and nodded. She wasn't exactly ready, but she knew she wouldn't be facing this alone. Daniel's presence was a foundation, a silent strength that kept her grounded. They stepped into the car and headed for the courthouse. During the drive, Daniel briefly took her hand, offering a wordless comfort that was more powerful than anything he could have said. The courthouse was imposing, with its marble columns and heavy doors. Olivia felt a chill as she walked through the corridor leading to the courtroom. As she entered, she saw her ex-husband seated on the other side, wearing an expression of false serenity. It had been years since she had last seen him. He looked older, but he still carried that arrogant demeanor that brought painful memories rushing back. She quickly averted her gaze, focusing instead on her lawyer, who was already prepared to begin. The judge entered the courtroom, and a tense silence fell over the room. The hearing commenced with the attorneys from both sides presenting their arguments. Her ex-husband's lawyer attempted to paint a picture of financial stability and repentance, claiming that he now wanted to be an involved father. Olivia felt anger rise in her chest. Involved? He knew nothing about the son she had raised on her own, The fevers, the nightmares, the moments of joy he had never been there to witness. When it was her turn to speak, Olivia stood. At first, her voice was hesitant, but it soon grew stronger. She recounted the years of abandonment, the hardships she had faced, and the devastating impact her ex-husband's absence had had on their son. With every word, she felt as though she were shedding a burden she had carried for far too long. When she finished, the silence in the room was almost tangible. Daniel, seated behind her, watched with quiet pride. He understood how much this moment meant to Olivia. He wasn't just witnessing a mother defending her child. He was seeing a woman confront the ghosts of her past with remarkable courage. After listening to the testimonies, the judge rendered his decision. Olivia would retain sole custody of her son, while the father would have supervised visitation rights once a month. The ruling brought Olivia immense relief but also a twinge of unease. She knew that her son had never formed a real bond with his father, and the thought of exposing him to those visits worried her. Still, it was a victory, and she needed to focus on what truly mattered: her son's safety and well-being. As she exited the courthouse, Daniel was waiting for her on the front steps. He smiled warmly as she approached and, without hesitation, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You were incredible in there," he said softly, his voice full of admiration. Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes once more, but this time they were tears of relief. She gave him a small smile and shook her head. "I couldn't have done it without you." They walked together toward the car, and for the first time in a long while, Olivia felt that things were finally starting to fall into place. She had faced one of the greatest challenges of her life and emerged victorious. Now, a promising future lay ahead of her, a future in which Daniel was becoming an increasingly significant presence. After the hearing, Olivia began to breathe more easily. Although the court's decision regarding her ex-husband's visitation rights still lingered in her mind as a concern, the heavy burden of the legal battle was finally lifting. The drive back to the vineyard was quiet but peaceful. Daniel respected the moment, sensing that she needed time to process everything that had happened. Occasionally, he glanced at her, admiring the strength reflected on her face. When they arrived at the property, the sky was painted in shades of purple and gold. Olivia's son ran to meet her at the gate, his innocent smile lighting up the scene. She knelt down and hugged him tightly, as if to reassure herself that he would never be taken from her. Daniel watched the moment unfold, feeling a warmth in his chest that he couldn't fully explain. It was as though, little by little, he was becoming a part of this small family. Later that evening, Daniel invited Olivia to talk on the large veranda of the house. The air was cool and fragrant with the scent of ripe grapes. They sat in rocking chairs, a freshly opened bottle of wine resting on the table between them. Olivia, now more relaxed, let out a long sigh. "It still doesn't feel real," she confessed, swirling the wine in her glass. "I thought this whole process would consume me completely." "But you won," Daniel replied, looking directly at her. "Not just for yourself, but for your son. It was one of the bravest things I've ever seen anyone do." She smiled, though there was a certain vulnerability in her eyes. Daniel could see beyond the victory, the emotional exhaustion from years of struggle. He knew that Olivia needed more than just legal support or professional advice. She needed to feel that she was no longer alone on this journey. "You know," she began after a brief silence, "since my ex left, I promised myself I wouldn't depend on anyone. It wasn't easy, but I managed. And yet, over these past few months, you've been this constant presence in my life. That's something I wasn't used to anymore." Daniel nodded, fully understanding what she meant. "I was used to doing everything on my own too," he admitted. "Life in business made me that way. Everything was about control, about not needing to rely on anyone but myself. But here, with you, things have started to change." Olivia felt her heart skip a beat. There was something about Daniel's sincerity that made her defenses begin to crumble. It was hard to admit, but she could no longer imagine her life without him by her side. "I don't know where this will lead us," Olivia said softly, gazing at the stars beginning to appear in the sky. "But maybe it's time I stop fighting so hard against what I feel." Daniel leaned in slightly, gently taking her hand. "We don't need to rush anything. But whatever happens, I'm here. And I'll keep being here, Olivia." The moment stretched between them, filled with a deep and silent connection. There was no need for grand promises or extravagant declarations. That instant, under the starry sky, surrounded by the scent of the vineyard, was enough for both of them to understand that they were exactly where they were meant to be. The night wore on, and they continued sharing their stories, fears, and hopes. Every word brought their worlds closer together. It was as if, at long last, both of them were finding their way back to happiness. In the following weeks, Olivia threw herself into her work with renewed determination. The vineyard was thriving like never before, and every decision she made seemed to yield better than expected results. The current harvest was exceptional, with the grapes reaching the perfect condition for producing one of the finest wines the property had ever seen. The workers, once hesitant about the changes she had implemented, now showed confidence in her leadership, seeing the positive impact it had brought. Daniel, on the other hand, divided his time between managing his city business and frequent visits to the vineyard. Even when he was away, he called Olivia every night. Their conversations often began with updates about the property, but quickly turned to more personal matters. Over time, those nightly calls became the most anticipated part of their day for both of them. One morning, Daniel returned from a business trip without warning. When he arrived at the vineyard, he found Olivia overseeing the harvest. She wore work boots and a straw hat to shield herself from the sun, her expression focused as she gave instructions to the workers. He stood there for a few moments, simply watching her. There was something captivating about the way she moved so confidently in that environment. It was almost magical how she made everything flow so harmoniously. Olivia noticed his presence and waved, surprised but pleased to see him. "You're back early," she said, walking over to him with a radiant smile. "I wanted to see how things were going here," Daniel replied, returning her smile. "And it looks even better than I imagined." She smiled modestly, though her eyes shone with pride. She knew how hard she had worked to reach this level of excellence. "We're in a great place," she explained. "The production is on schedule, and the grape analyses show that this year's wine will be something special. I think we're ready to expand our market." Daniel nodded, impressed. He didn't just see Olivia's competence. He felt a growing admiration for the passion she poured into every detail. "You've transformed this place, Olivia. And honestly, you've transformed the way I see life. When I came here, all I wanted was to sell this vineyard and move on. Now, I can't imagine leaving it." Olivia froze for a moment, surprised by Daniel's confession. There was something profound in his words, something that touched her more deeply than she was prepared to admit. He wasn't just talking about the vineyard, he was talking about the impact she had had on his life. "I feel like something has changed too," Olivia replied softly. "When I came here, I thought it would just be another job, a way to secure my son's future. But now, this place has become so much more than that for me." Daniel stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "Maybe this is the new beginning we both needed," he said, his eyes locking with hers. Olivia held his gaze, and for a brief moment, the world around them seemed to disappear. She knew a bright future lay ahead, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to dream of a future where she wouldn't be alone. They spent the rest of the day together, discussing new plans for the vineyard and walking through the rows of vines as if they were the true guardians of the land. Their connection deepened with each step, built not only on the present but also on the memories they now shared. Later that afternoon, as Daniel and Olivia continued talking about expansion plans, a black car slowly approached along the main road. A tall, well-dressed man stepped out, accompanied by a local real estate agent, and began walking toward them. Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. Something about the scene felt out of place, like an unexpected storm cloud on a clear day. Sensing her tension, Daniel glanced at her briefly before greeting the newcomers. "Mr. Crawford, it's a pleasure to meet you," the realtor said, shaking Daniel's hand. "This is Mr. Martin Harris, a prospective buyer interested in the property." Olivia froze. The word buyer echoed in her mind like an alarm. She turned to Daniel, trying to grasp what was happening. He, in turn, seemed surprised, as if he had completely forgotten about the sale negotiations that had been initiated months earlier, long before Olivia had entered his life. "Oh, right," Daniel replied, his tone uncertain. "I didn't remember I was still receiving visits from potential buyers." Olivia bit her lip, trying to maintain her composure. However, there was a hint of bitterness in her voice when she finally spoke. "So, you're still planning to sell the vineyard?" Daniel turned to her quickly, realizing the weight of her question. He immediately tried to explain. "Olivia, that was decided before I met you. Before all of this. I haven't thought about it at all recently." She shook her head, turning away. She felt betrayed, as if everything they had built together could be erased with a single signature. She couldn't shake the feeling that once again, she was on the verge of losing something important in her life. "I need to check on a few things in the shed," she said abruptly, walking away before he could say anything more. Daniel watched her leave with a heavy heart. He knew he had made a mistake by not canceling the visits from prospective buyers. Now, in addition to dealing with the offer he was likely to receive, he needed to regain Olivia's trust, something he was not willing to lose. The realtor and the buyer continued asking questions about the property as Daniel guided them through the vineyard. He answered mechanically, his mind elsewhere, preoccupied with Olivia. By the end of the tour, Mr. Harris expressed how impressed he was and made it clear that he would be submitting a substantial offer. Later that night, Daniel received the email with the proposal, an amount that far exceeded his expectations. He sat on the veranda, staring at the phone screen while the dark sky above glittered with a blanket of stars. The silence around him seemed to amplify the turmoil in his mind. The offer was tempting, enough to resolve many of his financial concerns and fund expansions in other areas of his business. Yet, as he gazed at the vineyards bathed in soft moonlight, his memories tugged him in a different direction. He thought of the summers he had spent there with his parents, the carefree afternoons riding his bike, and more recently, the conversations and moments he had shared with Olivia. This place was no longer just a property or an investment. It was a part of his story, and now the backdrop to something he was beginning to believe was truly special. Daniel knew that if he sold the vineyard, he would not only lose his connection to the past, but also the chance for a future that was finally starting to make sense. The next morning, with renewed determination, he went to find Olivia. She was in the vineyard, inspecting the vines with her usual focused expression. When she saw him approaching, her face remained serious. He stopped beside her, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Olivia, I need you to hear me out." She crossed her arms, waiting for him to continue. "I thought a lot about everything last night. I received an offer for the vineyard, an offer far beyond what I ever expected. But I can't accept it. Selling this place would mean losing something I didn't even realize I needed until I met you. I want to stay, not just because of the vineyard, but because of you, because of what we're building together." Olivia stared at him in surprise. His words echoed within her, dissolving much of the resentment she had felt the day before. It was hard not to believe in Daniel's sincerity. She knew he was also taking a great risk by making this decision. "Are you sure about this?" she asked cautiously. "It's not an easy decision." He gave her a gentle smile, his eyes reflecting a calm determination. "I'm more sure about this than anything else in my life." She felt a surge of emotion course through her. The walls she had built around herself over the years finally began to crumble. Slowly, she stepped forward and, without saying another word, wrapped her arms around him. This embrace was different from any they had shared before. It carried silent promises of a future together. The fate of the vineyard and their lives was, at last, sealed. They didn't need any more words. Together, they were ready to face whatever came their way, certain that, here on this fertile land, they had found something worth protecting. That same afternoon, after his final conversation with Olivia, Daniel decided to gather all the vineyard's employees. It was time to share his decision and reaffirm his commitment to the future of the estate. As he walked toward the central courtyard, where the workers were already beginning to assemble, he felt a mixture of anxiety and relief. For the first time in years, he was choosing something for its emotional value, not just the cold calculations of a business plan. The workers lined up quietly, some exchanging curious glances. Olivia stood beside Daniel, her expression serene yet attentive. Daniel cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice steady, but with a sincerity that few had seen from him before. "I know many of you have heard rumors about the possible sale of this property," he began. "And it's true, when I inherited the vineyard, that was the original plan. To me, at first, this was just a business, a financial asset to be managed or sold. But these past few months have taught me something important." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the faces of those gathered before him. "This place is more than just a piece of property. It carries stories, traditions, and dreams. I've seen that in each of you, and especially in Olivia. She's the one who helped me see the true value of this land, these vines, and this community. Because of that, I've decided not to sell. We're staying here, together, and we'll make this vineyard into something even greater." For a moment, there was absolute silence before the news spread like a ripple through the crowd. Faces that had been tense and worried lit up with joy. Smiles and murmurs of approval filled the air. Some workers broke into applause, while others voiced their gratitude aloud. It was as if an invisible weight had been lifted from everyone's shoulders. Daniel looked at Olivia and saw something deeper than relief in her eyes. It was a blend of pride and affection that warmed his heart. She knew him well enough by now to understand how much that decision meant to him. He was a man accustomed to calculated choices, but this time, he had allowed himself to be guided by what truly mattered. After the announcement, a small, impromptu celebration began to take shape. Some of the workers opened bottles of wine, and glasses were quickly passed around. Daniel and Olivia quietly slipped away to a higher point in the vineyard, where they could watch the cheerful scene below. The sun was low on the horizon, bathing the landscape in a soft, golden light. "I didn't expect things to turn out this way," Daniel said, breaking the silence. "When I came here, I didn't think anything about this place could affect me. Now, I can't imagine leaving." Olivia smiled, her eyes glimmering in the sunset's glow. "Sometimes you need to slow down to realize what really matters. You've spent years rushing from one business to the next. Maybe all of this happened to make you stop and see what was right in front of you." Daniel pondered her words. She was right. The inheritance of the vineyard, reconnecting with her, the challenges they had faced together. It all seemed like an inevitable path leading to this moment. "I want to build something here, Olivia, not just for myself but for us. I want this place to be our new beginning." She felt the weight of his words. For so long, she had avoided forming attachments, afraid of being abandoned again. But Daniel was showing her, day after day, that he was willing to stay, to weather the storms by her side. "I want that too," she replied, her voice filled with emotion. "And I think together, we can make this vineyard into something truly special." They moved closer, and Daniel gently cradled her face in his hands. The kiss that followed was soft yet profound. It wasn't merely a gesture of passion but a silent promise, of partnership, of trust, and of a shared future. The future stretched out before them, as vast as the vineyards extending to the horizon. In that moment, they both knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and Olivia worked side by side to solidify the vineyard's new plans. They decided to open the estate to tourism, offering tastings and immersive experiences that told the story of the land. The vineyard's name began gaining recognition throughout the state, attracting not only wine experts but also visitors seeking a retreat in the rolling hills of Napa Valley. Olivia led the improvements in the production process, ensuring every detail was perfect. Her commitment and passion were evident in every decision she made. That year's harvest promised to be exceptional, and the first batches of wine were nearly ready for bottling. The excitement among the workers was palpable. They now had a clear purpose and felt they were part of something extraordinary. Daniel was equally involved. He had left part of his business operations in New York under the supervision of his partners so he could fully dedicate himself to the vineyard. It was a new chapter in his life, and he embraced it with enthusiasm. He learned more about winemaking than he had ever imagined. Listening to Olivia explain the different grape varieties, fermentation times, and barrel aging, the hands-on work, the connection to the land, and the creative process awakened a sense of fulfillment in him that the corporate world had never provided. Despite the demanding routine, they allowed themselves moments to escape their responsibilities and enjoy each other's company. One evening, after a long day of meetings with suppliers, Daniel surprised Olivia with an invitation. "Come with me. I want to show you something," he said, flashing a mysterious smile. Curious, she followed him to the highest point on the property, a small hill with a panoramic view of the vineyards. Under the silvery glow of the moon, the scene was enchanting. The rows of grapevines seemed to ripple gently in the breeze, as if part of a dream. "This is my favorite spot here," Daniel confessed, sitting down on the grass and motioning for her to join him. "When I was a kid, I used to come up here to think, or sometimes just to admire the view." Olivia sat beside him, wrapping her arms around her knees. A deep sense of peace washed over her, as if time had paused just for them. "It's beautiful," she murmured, letting her gaze wander over the landscape. Daniel watched her in silence for a moment, captivated by the way the moonlight illuminated her face. He knew he was in the presence of something rare and precious. Everything he had experienced up to that point seemed like a winding path that had led him straight to her. "Olivia, I never thought I'd find something like this," Daniel finally said, his voice gentle but steady. "Not just the vineyard, but you." She turned to him, surprised by the intensity in his words. Daniel took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I know the past has left its scars, and I know we both carry fears. But I want you to know that I'm here to stay. I want to build a life with you, create memories that are as strong and lasting as these roots." He continued, gesturing toward the vineyards below them. "We don't need to have all the answers right now. We just need to be together." Olivia felt her heart race. For years, she had shielded herself from promises and deep emotions. But in that moment, she realized that Daniel wasn't offering empty words. He was someone willing to share her journey, uncertainties and all. "I want that too," she said, her voice full of emotion. "You've become a part of my life in ways I never imagined. And for the first time in a long while, I feel like I can truly trust someone." They leaned in, their lips meeting in a tender, meaningful kiss. The wind whispered softly through the trees, and the distant rustling of leaves blended with the steady rhythm of their hearts. That night, beneath the starry sky, Daniel and Olivia reaffirmed something they no longer needed to say aloud. They were together on a path that promised to be as fertile and enduring as the vines surrounding them. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, love, and a bright future waiting to unfold. The following months brought a fast but rewarding pace. The vineyard officially opened its doors to visitors, offering guided tours that showcased not only the production process but also the rich history of the estate. Daniel and Olivia believed that this personal touch was essential to setting their product apart in the market. Tourists were captivated by stories of family traditions and the meticulous care given to each harvest. Soon, Their wines began gaining recognition, earning prominent placements in fine restaurants and specialty shops, driving demand to impressive levels. With every new challenge, Daniel and Olivia faced it together. He had become her greatest supporter, actively participating in decisions while always respecting her expertise and leadership in the technical aspects. Olivia, for her part, finally felt that she no longer had to bear everything alone. They had found the perfect balance between work and their personal lives, and it showed in the vineyard's success. One Sunday morning, they decided to host a special event for the local community. A large outdoor celebration was set up in the central courtyard, with long tables decorated with flowers and crystal glasses sparkling under the sun. There was live music, dishes made with fresh, regional ingredients, and, of course, a generous selection of their finest wines. Entire families attended, creating a warm, joyful atmosphere filled with laughter and cheer. Olivia moved gracefully through the event, wearing a serene smile as she greeted guests and ensured everything was in order. From a distance, she spotted Daniel chatting with a group of people. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and in that gaze, Olivia felt something profound, like she was exactly where she belonged, as if she had finally found her place in the world. Later, as the sun began to set, they stepped away from the bustling crowd to take in the view from a nearby hill. The twilight painted the vineyard in hues of orange and gold, creating a breathtaking display. Daniel held Olivia's hand, and the two stood in peaceful silence, absorbing the beauty of the moment. "Did you know that the first time I came up here with you, I was already falling in love?" Daniel asked suddenly, his smile subtle but sincere. Olivia raised her eyebrows, both surprised and amused. "Really? I had no idea. You seemed so serious and focused on business. Maybe I was trying to convince myself that was all I cared about. But deep down, I already knew this place meant nothing without you." She squeezed his hand tighter, feeling the depth of his words. The gentle breeze whispered around them, carrying the scent of ripening grapes through the air. "I think, in a way, the vineyard chose us," Olivia said thoughtfully. "It brought us together, made us confront our fears, and opened space for something new." Daniel nodded, reflecting on the journey they had shared. It wasn't just luck that had brought them here. Both of them had battled insecurities, healed from past wounds, and found a renewed purpose in supporting each other. "Olivia, I've never been as happy as I am now," he said softly, his voice steady but full of emotion. "And I want this to last, no matter what the future holds." She smiled, her heart warmed by a blend of love and gratitude. There was a comforting clarity in what they had built together. Nothing had been rushed or forced. It felt as though every step had been essential to bring them to this point. As night slowly enveloped the vineyard, the celebration continued in full swing down in the courtyard. Daniel and Olivia walked down the hill hand in hand, ready to rejoin the people who had become part of their story. The lanterns glowed softly, illuminating their path, just as their future now seemed illuminated, full of endless possibilities. Time seemed to flow differently for Olivia and Daniel. The seasons passed swiftly, marked by the rhythm of harvests and the steady growth of the vineyard. They became inseparable partners, not just in business but in all facets of life. The property, now one of the most sought-after destinations in the region, thrived more each day. Yet, what mattered most wasn't the vineyard's success but the life they had built together. A family and a home that anchored them in happiness and purpose. One spring afternoon, Olivia surprised Daniel by asking him to meet her on the veranda of the mansion. The sky was clear, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of flowers beginning to bloom. Daniel, intrigued, arrived right on time and found Olivia standing by the railing, gazing at the horizon with a serene smile. She appeared peaceful, yet there was something else in her eyes, an anticipation he couldn't quite decipher. "You're being very mysterious today," he said as he approached, gently placing his hand on her waist. "What's going on?" Olivia turned to him, hesitating for a brief moment as if carefully choosing her words. Finally, she took a deep breath and clasped his hands. "Daniel, there's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice soft but full of emotion. "I'm pregnant." The words seemed to hang in the air, gently echoing in Daniel's mind before he fully grasped their meaning. His eyes widened, and for a moment he was speechless, trying to process the news. Then, a slow, radiant smile spread across his face, lighting him up in a way Olivia had never seen before. "Pregnant?" he repeated, as if he needed to hear it again to believe it. We're having a baby?" Olivia nodded, her eyes shimmering with tears of joy. "Yes, we're going to have a child." Daniel pulled her into a tight embrace, as if wanting to shield her and the life growing inside her. The emotion was overwhelming. He had never imagined that his life could feel so full of meaning and love. For years, he had focused solely on professional success, pushing aside any thoughts of building a family. Now, everything seemed to have fallen perfectly into place, almost like a dream. "You've just given me the best news of my life," he said, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes. "I don't even know how to thank you for this." Olivia smiled, wiping away a tear that trailed down her cheek. "I don't think you need to thank me. This is something we're building together." They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, as the gentle breeze stirred the curtains on the veranda. In the distance, the sound of laughter and conversations from the courtyard blended with the songs of birds. Life continued to bloom around them, just as the love they had nurtured flourished. In the days that followed, word of the pregnancy spread among the vineyard staff and close friends. The estate became filled with quiet celebrations and well wishes for the couple. Olivia and Daniel felt more connected than ever, and the future, once uncertain, now gleamed with the promise of happiness. One night, as they sat on the hill once again, gazing at the stars, Daniel held Olivia's hand and spoke in a low, steady voice. "No matter what happens, I'll be here, always, for you, for our child, and for everything we're building together." She squeezed his hand in response, feeling the warmth of his promise. She knew they were no longer alone on their journeys. They had found not only each other but also a safe home where they could grow and face the future side by side. The vineyard, now at the height of its success, had become a symbol of their new life. Each harvest, every bottle of wine, carried the essence of their love and resilience. It was a cycle that never truly ended but continued to renew itself, just like the bonds that united them. If you enjoyed this video, let us know in the comments. Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to subscribe. A big hug, and see you in the next video.